things that I was talking to a couple of these guys about was the mindset of a single focused developer, somebody who's kind of stuck into one language, whether it be .NET, Ruby, whatever it may be, SQL, whatever it might be that you are working with. We want to make sure that people understand, hey, there's a spectrum beyond that, and some of the advantages and disadvantages to being in that situation, some of the avenues out of that situation, some of the things that might inspire or motivate people to look beyond just the tunnel or the area that they might be in. So I've asked a few of these folks up here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hand them the mic. We'll let them introduce themselves, and then I'll stand up here and moderate, which means I'll just stand and watch. And we'll see how it goes. But the thing is, this is a speaker panel, which means the speakers don't actually know anything different than you know, other than their own personal opinions, okay? We've got mic set up over here, and a mic set up over there. I love how everybody looks. We got a mic set up over here, and a mic set up over here. So this is all about participation. These are developers, your developers, whatever IT pros, whatever your technology background is, you understand this topic just as well as they do, right? They were just selected because I know specific experiences that each of them have had that I think would be valuable to add to the discussion, right? But feel free to step up to the mic and give them questions. I'm gonna let them talk about their backgrounds first, introduce themselves, but jump up on the mic. We've got them back so they're not right up front, so you don't gotta worry about everybody looking at you, because you'll be back in the middle. But get out there and participate in the discussion, okay? And we'll let this run, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock at night, whatever. And then we'll do the prizes. Okay, I'm just kidding, it won't last that long. I'll stop it before then. And I'm gonna start with Seth.
I do write code, I promise. If you go to github.com/Seth Juarez, you'll find some good code there. I'm a program manager over analytics. My background is in computer science. You know, like the stuff that I go home and like, hey, guess what I wrote today, honey? And she's like, she's really nice, and she like looks at me and is thinking about, you know, something else. My degree, I got a master's degree in computer science. My research was artificial intelligence, specifically in the area of predictive analytics, or AI. I'm the program manager of analytics at DevExpress. We make fantastic tools. We have other friends that make tools here too. So one of the things that I like a lot is I like learning a lot of stuff. And so one of the things that I want to talk about in general, and sort of to whet your palate and start thinking about questions, is why would you ever consider looking at a different language? Why would that be important? And so I want you to think about it. I have some reasons why I think it's important, and I'll tell you about it, but that's what I want you to think about. Why would it be important to learn a different language, especially if all you do, for example, is C#? Or for example, all you do is Ruby, right? There's nothing that says you can't go to like Whole Foods with a guy that writes JavaScript if you're a C# guy, right? And so I'm just saying, or go hug a tree with a Ruby guy. There's just something about languages, right? And so that's what I want you to think about, and that's what I'm probably going to talk about. So who's next?
Sure. Hi, I'm James Bender. I'm a developer evangelist for Telerik. Before that, I just started about 3 months ago. Before that, I was a consultant for 20-something years. So I've kind of been in the trenches. I started off as the new guy who didn't know anything and got stuck writing the documentation until they figured out I can't spell. And then I finally got to write code, which was a great day. And I kind of worked my way up, got older, a little rounder, until eventually I was running a team. And so I've kind of been through a lot of the things you guys probably going through now in your career. Worked with a lot of different technologies. I started, I can't even, I'm saying this is like a weird AA meeting or something. Started off doing Power Builder, of all things. Who said woo-hoo? That was me. I kind of did some Java.NET. So kind of address Seth's point. There's no really one best language for everything out there, so you have to kind of look around. And it kind of also parallels something Seth said. When I was a developer consultant, I would go home and talk about coding problems. The only difference was my wife is a developer. Oh. So instead of the la 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 la, I got, why'd you do it that way? So it was a little bit different of a home situation.
I think I like the other way better.
Sometimes I was like, damn, she's right. And actually, she is a Ruby developer, so a lot of questions we get asked for all we'll stop. That's how we're going to raise the children.
A lot of picnics.
A lot of picnics, yes. So I'm kind of interested to see what your thoughts on that as well. So I will pass this on.
Thank you. I don't know how close to hold the mic. Is this good? Too loud? My name is Alex Robson. I'm a system architect at LeanKit, and just recently joined their team. Very excited to be there. I got started with .NET pretty much right when it came out and did about 10 years of C-Pound. It's a pretty good language. And discovered that there, in some circumstances, there's a bit of a glass ceiling with what some tool sets can do, and after beating my head against a brick wall and trying to make it do things that people would say it's not meant to do, I started looking at other languages and tool sets to solve specific problems. So I'm really excited to hear what different folks want to know more about from an experience standpoint, and this will be an interesting panel. Ryan?
Hi there, I'm Ryan Niemeyer. I'm a JavaScript engineer with a Pen 2. I've been there for about 6 months. Before that, I spent 14 years at a healthcare software company, and I was in QA. I was a test engineer. When I was hired, I didn't do any coding. It wasn't a position that even did coding, but within a year, I knew that programming was really all I wanted to do. So I spent lots of time in lots of different languages, finding ways to program, even though it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing necessarily. And over the years, got involved with .NET and various other languages, and within the last 3 years, really tried to get involved in open source and got involved in some open source projects, and have really been enjoying that.
All right, so we're going to prime the pump here. How many C# developers do we have here? Holy crap. I was going to start with Erlang, but maybe that wasn't, I start Delphi? How many JavaScript people?
How many are doing both?
Both. So there's 2 hands. How many of you have used a functional language? Okay, so the weird thing is that the JavaScript guys that raised their hand for both C# and JavaScript, some of you did not raise your hand. The JavaScript's not a functional language, is what I'm being told.
It's a multi-paradigm language.
So, have you ever passed a function into a JavaScript function? What?
Well, no, that's a good question. If you want to go up to Mike, what makes something a functional language? Why don't you grab a mic?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I'm not a functional language developer, but I've been to enough user groups that are full of functional language developers, and every time someone says that, they come to beat you down.
It is a functional language because it is a first-class citizen in the language.
Can we give him a thing?
Yeah, we got a
Or just clapping. So
John says no to MacBooks.
So I can go with a look. So I'll tell you, the first time I learned functional language, I was in a class, right? And when you do like graduate work in computer science, you know how when you were doing your bachelor's degree, it was like your bachelor's degree is like a series of different shaped hoops that were of various sizes that you needed to jump through. So when I walked into my first master's class on functional programming, the professor was like, yeah, how about everyone pick a language and do something and then bring it next week. And so we all show up the next week, right? And everyone had spent like 15 to 20 hours on the thing they were doing, and they got up and we ran out of time, right? Do you remember the different size hoops you jumped through and how tedious it was? Imagine a class where you showed up and that's what happened, right? And so when someone gets dogmatic on me about what's functional, what's not functional, you should always do BDD, or if you don't do TDD, you're an idiot, or, you know, when someone gets dogmatic, your bit should flip. Right? Because the thing about being a polyglot programmer is once you start thinking differently, the concepts are important, right? If you use functions as a variable, that's functional.
So, Seth, does that make C# a functional language?
Why, good question, Mr. Bender.
Totally didn't say that.
There is a talk I give on functional programming. I don't know who's seen that, but I do some really dirty things with C#. Like where there's parentheses, so that you think it's like Lisp or something, right? But it turns out you should do it, right? But it's just being able to think that way is different. The first time I told somebody, like, hey, guess what? You can store function in a variable, right? These are called funcs in C#. In JavaScript, they're called variables. Right? The first time I did that, and the first time I thought about executing them and passing them around, that's a way of thinking functional. But as an imperative programmer, you wouldn't think to do that. Right? Because I do a machine learning library, some of you might know this. There is a way to do an indexer in C#, right? This, and then you can pass a number. I let you pass in a function on the setter.
It's really cool.
That's like the ultimate reuse, right? Everything that's a 0, set it to 1, right? You can do that in one call. And so, my personal opinion, and this is again my opinion, and I'm going to be somewhat controversial to elicit questions, okay, is everyone should know at least one static language, one dynamic language, and one functional language. Right? If you're a dynamic language guy, you're better at unit testing. Why? Because nobody knows what's going to happen.
You have to be. The reason you're better is because you have to be.
Right? If you're a good functional programmer, that's going to make you change to. So, you see what I'm saying? So I know that's somewhat controversial, but we've got to get these guys to talk. Sorry.
Good question.
So I have spent the last 18 months, 2 years in C# and late 90s JavaScript, and I am playing Lua in free time, and so I feel like I've got the static and I've got the dynamic, having a blast, and mocking in Lua convinced me that I now finally understand what I've been telling my friends I understood for years about mocking in C#. And I'm wondering, as you try to go down that checklist of static, dynamic, and functional, and we sit here and laugh about C# being functional and JavaScript being functional, where do you set the bar for telling yourself you put yourself into a functional language when so many languages kind of behave like functional languages?
Well, part of that is how are you using it? I mean, you can use JavaScript as an object-based language, or you can use it as a functional language. I think most of us who have done it for web development are probably more used to it as a functional language. We have our body, or in our header tag, we have our script. We just have functions out there. We don't really think of it in terms of objects. Really, we haven't gotten to that point until two things have happened. We've got JavaScript making AJAX calls out and getting JSON back. For a lot of people, that was their first introduction to JavaScript objects. I had one guy actually tell me, you can't do objects or classes in JavaScript. I'm like, you can. The other thing I think and this is kind of where it's weird seeing people adapt, is this idea of TDD for JavaScript, which really tends to use objects a lot. And that, it's kind of funny because, especially with C# developers, in C#, I think they kind of have this weird genetic memory where if they see file ends in .cs, well, it has to be in a class. If file ends in a HTML or CSHTML, well, it has to be this way, it can't be functional. And when they have to switch that, it's kind of this weird, almost kind of change of mindset where you're already doing this, now you're just doing it in a slightly different language.
So one of the things I would, let's say, about whether or not you're taking advantage of all the capabilities of a functional language is, when you're looking at a function, ask yourself, if I pass in the same set of inputs, do I get the same result? Do I always get the same output? Because you can have a functional language, something like JavaScript, that is multi-paradigm, and access state, and use that state to change the result. Things get a little bit dirty. So to one of the points I heard earlier is functional programmers who are purists get really fussy about JavaScript's not functional. It's because they've seen folks mix the paradigms, sometimes to a disadvantage. Right? How testable is code that always performs the same task given a set of consistent parameters? It's very testable. You might even argue, how much do I have to test that thing? Right? If I'm not accessing state and there's no way to mutate how that function behaves. So, to your point, learning how to do dynamic and static and functional, and hang out with the purist guys and just listen to them talk, you learn how to apply the advantages of all these different paradigms to your application, become a better programmer, right, and deliver better value. Yeah, on top of that, there's certain, so to answer your question, the way you know that you're, at least this is the way it was for me, is when I got really uncomfortable in those languages and started feeling uncomfortable and then started to get a little comfortable with the discomfort, that's when I knew it was okay, right? Or I had a rash. I mean, if I don't know what it was, it was something like that. But to speak to, for example, the notion of mutability, right? We're getting into high sort of octane multi-processor into your GPU kind of code. The notion of mutability is very important. And if you don't know what that is, your code is not going to be parallelizable. And so there's certain things that you need to do. So to answer your question, it's discomfort. But again, with languages, every language is good at something. When someone builds a language, it's sort of like their world opinion on how computing should work. And so every language has a very strong opinion. And so if you don't know more than one language, it's like you're going into a gunfight with a knife, right? Is that how it goes? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, and so you got to know your tools. And again, I'm a Microsoft guy in the sense that we build Microsoft tools, but we build JavaScript tools as well. But it's still good to know where your stuff, what your stuff is good at.
Let's take a quick question over here, and then we'll come back.
It's more of a comment than a question, really, but hopefully it'll spur further stuff. First, I wanted to point out that if you really want to go in a functional style, you can do that in almost any language. You could do it in C, fast moving computers, and not have any global state. And yeah, you can do it. But
You're right, but in some languages you can do it more better.
it's easier in some languages.
That's right.
What I would suggest is if people want to try a functional language, go to a language that forces you to be functional. Because when you're after learning something new and thinking in a different way, so just go to a language that's language.
We're all going to go Haskell.
Right, I was going to ask, what language forces you to be functional? You know what? That's a good answer, though.
You know, to your question, the professor that taught my functional language class, he is one of the main contributors to Scheme. But notice that even, like this is your baby, even he said, pick a functional language that you want. And so we had people do an F#, OCaml, Erlang, Haskell, and you get into things like monads inside of Haskell. Because we had multiple people doing multiple different functional languages, I saw that even within those, there were certain strengths. Like Don Simon, F#, he wanted to move the functional pointer more closer to the C# pointer. And so you can see that he kind of put some things in there that purists would be upset about. Like the keyword mutable, right?
Let me interject real quick here. Before we go down the path of purely defining functional languages and things like that, can we tackle the premise, because I don't know that everybody here understands, first off, functional languages at all. Some do, some may not. But more importantly, what is a polyglot and why is that beneficial to your career? And how do you get going in that direction?
He wants me to start, I don't know why.
No, I'm saying, yeah, let everybody get a shot at that one.
Well, I think for me, it's just, well, one thing I want to say before that is it's interesting listening about different languages, but me being so focused on JavaScript, there's so many differences in the way that you write JavaScript, say with the frameworks out there now, whether you're using Backbone or Angular, it's completely different. Just because you know JavaScript doesn't mean you know the style of one or the other, and so I always think it's interesting to try to learn about all of them and try to understand the pros and cons of each and try to use the right one at the right time. But as far as languages, I mean, I know a lot of you are C# developers, but there's no reason why your job or your employer needs to dictate exactly who you are as a programmer. There's no reason you can't start to learn about Node. Maybe you're not going to have a chance to use it in your job, but it doesn't hurt to start to learn about it, not just kind of poo-poo it and say, well, we can already do these things. Same with Ruby on Rails. I mean, it's really interesting to learn about those things and then even just apply it back to the way you write C# in some cases.
So a polyglot to me is someone that, so you know how we have become the de facto support center for all of our familiars? You know what I'm saying, right? They call you and my iPad's not turning on, we'll plug it in, you know, kind of thing. You all have the cousin, you know, that needs the website. You know what I'm talking about, right? Hey, you know, it's really easy to build a website and it's for I'm opening a Piggly Wiggly down there in Arkansas. And
I'll give you $500 to build my website.
I'll give you $500. I'm being generous because I know this is easy for you. Go pick something you haven't done yet. Write it in that, right? Because your cousin that gave you $500, right? You can take 2 months. Who cares? What are they going to do? Fire you? You're no longer my cousin. Thank goodness, right? One less support call. So what I'm saying is that we all have our side things that we do, right? My main job is I build visualization tools for expressing data. But on the side, I write an open source something. And there's always something you all do on the side. Everyone has the on the side coding thing they do when they should be asleep, right? Pick a language that you haven't used. So for me, a polyglot is someone that knows a static language, dynamic language, and a functional language. It doesn't matter which, right? But I remember for the first time learning certain functional things like mutability or currying, for example. And so the first time, the way currying works, if you don't know what it is, it's not like Indian food, even though it sounds like it, right? So it's executing a function, but not all the way, right? And it sounds kind of weird, but imagine if you could have this like really cool function that does stuff, but you want another function that does something similar that has less parameters, right? Imagine if you could just call the other function, but not all the way. And I find myself, once I learn that, I find myself writing something, you know, in a library, and I'm like, man, I wish I could just curry this. But I can't, right? Because to do it in C#, you have to do weirdness. It's not nice, right? And so notice that just me being able to think about currying in a different way has allowed me to expand the way I think, right? Nobody really cares if I was hiring someone and someone said, I don't know how to do this, but I can figure it out. I prefer that better than some guy or gal that says, yeah, I really want to stay within my own niche. It's like, you know, there's no such thing in our industry as a niche. How many times have you changed language, or how many times has technology changed? And so a polyglot programmer to me is someone that really has spent the time learning functional, static, dynamic. My first dynamic language was Python, my first static language was Java, and my first functional language was F#. But that's not what I program right now. I do C#.
So I think you covered it pretty well. One of the questions people ask me all the time is, well, what other language should I learn? What should I learn this, should I learn that? And my advice is look around the people around you. And I'll kind of relate my experience. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. We have this weird thing going on where .NET developers go to sleep at night and then the pod people come and they all wake up as Rubyists. So that has kind of made me think, you know, a lot of these guys I know, they're sharp guys and they're not totally abandoning .NET, but they're really getting into this Ruby thing. So maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something interesting that I need to look at. So that's kind of why I've gotten interested in Ruby. So talk to your friends, find out what they're doing, find out what's getting them interested, and then take a look at it. It might not pay off. You might get into it and go, this is dumb, or this isn't really what I'm thinking, or this isn't really how I want to go, and that's fine. I mean, all you're going to lose is a little bit of your time, but you're going to gain some knowledge. Even if you end up not staying with it, you're going to know why you don't particularly care for that.
So going back to the original question, because I want to make sure I heard something and I'm not answering something you didn't ask. You said, why does it matter to your career as well? Because it's actually mattered to my career quite a bit. If I had only stayed in C#, I would have missed out on getting to work with a lot of different groups of exceptionally talented people and learning a great deal from those folks. Being able to know enough JavaScript to go listen to a JavaScript talk and learn something from somebody who's done something exceptional in JavaScript, or read an article from one of the, let's say a social media company, they're solving really difficult problems using some other language. If all you know is C# and the only way you can think about things is the, let's say, C# idioms, you're missing out on all these different ways to solve problems. And what happens when your employer has a real need and the tool set that you have in your hands doesn't really fit that, right? If you haven't looked at anything else, you don't have contacts with and good relationships with other people using different tool sets, you have no, it's the Dilbert joke, it's a paradigm shifting without a clutch, right? You guys ever heard that? So there's just all these things you're not aware of. You don't even know what's available to you that you could be taking advantage of. And so, especially as we watch our industry change and we see scale becoming a bigger and bigger concern, people want to see more interactivity. I'm sure that's a lot of what you do, right? Is there's more and more data. How do we present it in a way that people can make good decisions about this stuff? Well, maybe C# isn't always the best language to produce those types of visualizations across massive data sets. As it turns out, there are other languages that do a fantastic job of that because that's what they were created to do. So looking around at this stuff and playing with it in your spare time, going to different meetups, learning about these things gives you an awareness so that when opportunities come up for you to leverage that stuff and dig in a little bit deeper, you at least know what's out there for you versus just saying, well, if Microsoft doesn't put the tools in my hands, I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah, Microsoft is not the end-all, be-all of the development experience, by the way. I know. So yeah, I'm on the outs now. I hope no one's filming this. But even look at Microsoft. They're embracing the open source side of things. They're even kind of saying now, hey, we built this framework, but we don't always have all the answers. And if somebody else is doing it better, then they're kind of embracing that and supporting that. Like jQuery is a great example. They could have gone off and built their own jQuery.net or JavaScript.net. But they're embracing these other products and they're saying, hey, these are already being used. This is out here. This is good. Take a look at it.
Go for one of the questions over here on the left. You can finish your
Let's
thought.
say one thing really quick. Show of hands. How many of you are aware that Microsoft is reclassifying themselves from a software company to a services and devices company? Okay. Well, now you're all aware. How many of you think that that might possibly have an impact on your career? Oh, okay, good. So I think that's why this is actually really timely talk. It's not to say, oh no, the sky is falling, not at all. But it's good to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And if you have amassed these skill sets in all these different languages, you've got nothing to worry about. So, question?
Yes, thank you. Is this thing on?
Yes.
I had to come up because my organs were bleeding when you all were having the functional talk back there.
Here we go.
They've begun to heal a little bit since I've been up here, especially the fellow who said, we could say C language is functional because I have function pointers. And that's absurd. It's just as absurd as saying JavaScript is a functional language. You have to have lazy evaluation, higher order functions, and probably things like currying and immutability. So the real sad thing is if people walk away from here today thinking that they can check off the functional box because they learned JavaScript, that's a huge loss. That's a huge loss. And you need to go to tryfsharp.org or spend, you don't have to install anything, spend 10 minutes with the language and really understand what a functional language really is. Now it's great that JavaScript has function pointers essentially. You can pass functions around, that's wonderful, that's how it's built. But it doesn't mean it's a functional language. And if you're really going to be a polyglot, and you're really going to take the time to learn from the experience of currying and lazy evaluation and all the things that a functional language really provides, you need to go to a functional language to do that. It's not JavaScript. I love JavaScript, but it's not a functional language.
Let me take an opportunity to agree and disagree with you. I appreciate what you're saying, and he's absolutely right. You will not learn all of the things that a true functional paradigm can provide for you and your mindset and how you approach problems if you go home and think, well, I did the jQueries once, so got the functional stuff down, on to the next thing. You are missing out because there's other stuff out there for you to learn, and I would say F# is cool, but it's also not pure because of the mutability thing and because of all of the other .NET things that they import into that.
The difference is it can be pure if you choose to use it that way.
Just like JavaScript.
I was gonna say, if you choose not to use any
Not just like JavaScript. You cannot do in JavaScript the things you can do in a pure functional language.
So can I jump in real quick? Because
we're
again,
fighting.
we don't want to fight, but I'll just say, I would like to say something.
This is getting good.
But I'm going to ask you to hold on, let's continue discussion, but if you're not this passionate when you have a discussion about something like that, you probably want to dig into some other languages. Right? Because this shows passion. You got people saying yes and no, I see this, I don't see
He's
that,
right,
that's
though.
great.
He's
Yes.
right. I don't. He's right. Like what I'm saying is, he's right. If you want to do a purely functional language, you have to get into Haskell and look at monads and look at how you. Yeah, actually, Erlang would be even more, right? And that was invented like in the '60s for telephony. Earlier, I don't know when it was.
80s.
80s. Okay, that was a little early. I was even born then. So. But he's right. So there's two things that I have to say. First of all, you are correct. You shouldn't go home and be like, I know JavaScript, so that means I know functional paradigms. What I'm saying is, though, that there are certain concepts inside of functional languages that you can take to other languages and be a better programmer.
There's no doubt. And I just wanted to make it clear that from my perspective, and I'm not trying to be a purist, but you don't just get to check off the box saying you're done with that if you've done that one experience.
And I will tell you,
there's so much richness out there to experience. It doesn't mean you have to go do a large-scale project with it, but go experiment with something that's purely functional, something that's purely dynamic, and something that's purely static.
And I will
then I think Steph's right. You cover those bases and you're good to go.
I will tell you also that there is no such committee that will tell you when it is that you're done learning the right thing. Okay, so he's not on the committee that tells you you're not a good programmer because of X. I'm not on that committee. My suggestions on this are very vague. They're not, and I'm talking about principles, not languages. No, I could have said y'all need to learn Haskell or you're stuck at functional programming. I didn't say that. I also will agree that JavaScript is not a functional language as pure as others. And there are certain things that you will miss, right? But I will say that your learning committee is you. Right? You need to go to something that's uncomfortable, and I'm giving you a suggestion of 3 general areas where you go to. Now go and Google with Bing, right? As Hanselman says. I don't think it's that funny either. And so find the functional language that you want to look at. Do you know you can write websites with Haskell with something that is called Yesod? You can write a website with Haskell today. And so maybe you want to do that for your cousin Bill, right? That needs the website for the Piggly Wiggly, right? He's right. But at the same time, don't feel constrained by dogmatism. That is the thing that irritates me the most. If someone is dogmatic about programming, they already started off wrong. Right? And so, yes.
May your organs never bleed again.
Yes.
There's a fine line. You shouldn't let people bully you or make you feel bad because you don't know something or you didn't do something by their book.
Or you chose a different language.
Or you chose a different language. It is important to be somewhat precise, as he was being, right? And say, oh, but there's what about currying and lazy evaluation, these other things that you'd be missing out on. So it's good to have both.
So he is right. I'm not saying he's not right. He is definitely right. JavaScript is not a purely functional language. But then again, neither is F#. But it's okay to learn F# to be functional. It's okay. It is great.
Do we have another comment from this side?
Yes, we do. Is this one on?
Yes.
So first, I guess the question is first why and then how. So I think that while a lot of good reasons have already been said, I think Stephen Carl, Code Complete 2, actually says it better than I've heard anyone else say it. He says that you should be able to program not only in your language, but into your language. So whatever knowledge or concepts you have, no matter where you've learned it, whether or not it's a different language or it's a musical construct, or if you saw a programming advertisement and you realize that they inserted some idea in your brain about to eat Doritos, however you learn how to communicate knowledge and information and mangle it, you should be able to do that in whatever language you're doing it. And that's why you become a polyglot. It's like I said, it's not for programming languages, it's for understanding, managing information. It's called information technology. We're in that umbrella of parts because we're managing information. So the next comment is about how. I think anyone who really works with the full stack is already on that path. And if you're not on the full stack, you should be able to already follow the advice of knowing the abstraction one layer up, one layer below. So almost everyone in this room should be at least knowing about the fact that they have SQL underneath and JavaScript above them, and how that can handle it. Beyond that, another book recommendation I would give is 7 Languages in 7 Weeks. I did finish it in 7 months. But you'll get a nice, interesting intro not only to Haskell, but also Clojure, Scala, IO, Ruby, Prolog, which I think actually might be the most important one listed.
Here's a Prolog joke. Yes.
In particular, because of the fact that we talked about functional, and I think someone called SQL functional, and I'm not going to debate whether or not it's functional, but I think you could also call it declarative or logic-based. And I think that when using those adjectives, you're talking about a whole different category of concepts that we don't necessarily think of. We think of trying to go through a particular problem usually by, okay, I have my initial state. What's the logic that I have to set up so that my initial state mutates into my final state? Whether or not there's actual mutable state involved, or it's just passing this information from one to the other, what is the answer really may be, what is the world? Well, what part of the world do I want to know about? And saying what those rules are, and something, seeing vision of the future as we want to be.
Thank you. I don't, look, when I sit up here, I don't profess, like, there's probably 99% of you that are smarter than me at one thing or another. I'm good at like half a thing, and I'm really good at half a thing, right? When I went to school, I realized how stupid I was and how smart I got, right? And in fact, if you've ever listened to This Developer's Life, there's an episode where I talk about just being completely embarrassed by a professor asking a question and me not knowing the answer. And so when I say these things, I'm not pretending to be like if we all got together and joined forces, we could seriously like, I don't know, do something crazy, like make Iron Man or something. You know what I'm saying? And so when I say these things, I tend to be fairly straightforward, but I'm not saying that I know everything about everything. I mean, nobody does. And every day I learn something. Like for example, I came to a session and I figured out finally, oh, that's how I should think about that. And my professors, the best one, said you should always learn how to make mental pictures, right? And what we're saying is, as a polyglot programmer, you will be better equipped to make these mental pictures faster, in a more concise way, and in a way that you can implement better, faster, stronger. In the words of the great.
It's going to make you look at the problem first and the technology second. You're going to find the technology that fits the problem.
Right. How about on the left?
Can you talk about the importance of language idioms and adhering to those?
It's completely critical. So this is how I learned about the importance of language idioms. I tried to build a distributed system in C#. Microsoft wasn't trying to create a tool set or a language for building distributed systems that scale out. I'm not saying it can't be done at all, but I was beating my head against the wall trying to make a tool do something that it was never intended to do. And at first I was bitter. It was like, Microsoft? But it's not really Microsoft's fault for making a really good hammer when what I needed was a screwdriver. So when you go into other languages, the really important thing to ask yourself is not just what's the syntax, it's what was this technology created to do? How is it intended to use? What is the mindset that I need to approach it with? There is a lot of angst and frustration towards JavaScript for being an awful language. And I really think, honestly, it's my opinion, that comes from trying to write my server-side languages, approaches, and everything into JavaScript and not learning the correct way to use JavaScript. So I believe that they're critical. So finding the right idioms, this goes back to put yourself in a community of people who use that tool and listen, right? Ask them, look at how they write it. GitHub is an amazing tool that we have at our disposal that allows us to see, I think, to a large degree, what idiomatic solutions look like in a given language or technology.
What do you mean by idiomatic? That's not a phrase I've heard before.
I don't think I used that word.
It's an
I'm
idiom.
No, I'm just kidding. I said idioms, language idioms, you know, like.
Conventions?
Well, yeah, for instance, one of the idioms, it appears to me in C# that using, passing around funcs is, maybe it's becoming kind of a common language idiom. Maybe some of the Microsoft framework are doing that, but it's not very common in the code that I see day to day. It's not very common in the code I see on GitHub.
C#'s evolved a lot though over time, so I think that's part of the reason why you see evolution in how people use the language, because that's one of the things Microsoft's good at, right? That's why C# adoption shot past, at least in some regions, Java, is because Microsoft continued to challenge themselves to introduce more language features and make it more versatile, right? Because again, as somebody who was doing C# for a very long time, I remember the days of reflection, because if I wanted to make something work for a lot of different use cases and not have to write 100 versions of the function, and also I didn't know all the good design patterns at the time, I would use reflection to try to make code stretch a little bit further, right? And then they introduced generics, and my life got a lot better, and I learned some better design patterns. But yeah, I agree. It's good to, like, when you get into a community, the worst thing you can do is say, well, we do it this way. Nobody cares. How do you do it?
I agree with that, but it feels like you can only push so far before your code is not readable anymore by somebody who is used to the kind of normal idioms.
Well, and that's part of it too. I mean, every group has its own, for lack of a better term, vocabulary, and it's going to help you communicate with those other people if you know that vocabulary. If you start trying, I mean, Ruby people work differently than .NET people, Java people. So, I mean, it's definitely important because you want to be able to communicate with those people. So when you have questions, you want to learn something, it's going to be easier for you to understand if you already speak the native language. So it's the language about
Jump over here to the right.
Hi, so I have two comments. So I'm a JavaScript background, but I have a big interest in other programming languages, and the way that exists itself for me, even though I don't think I would be formally called a polyglot programmer by any definition, there are other ways to go about learning a language in air quotes, other than actually sitting down and saying, I'm going to learn all of Haskell. And I found a lot of traction and those aha moments where I get this awesome moment of paradox, and I get just familiarity about other things just by reading books. There's learn new Haskell, learn some Erlang, essential Java, effective JavaScript, random PHP book. Like there are lots of books that you can read if that happens to be the way you learn. Books that you could read to have awareness that you're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean I have to sit there one day and say I'm going to become a JavaScript programmer or I'm going to become a Haskell programmer. But rather say I read this book and that's what it says. I've never heard of this thing before. It's still really confusing, but at least I have the touch this. I know roughly what this is supposed to be doing.
So it gives you more of a conceptual idea of what you're looking at, even if you don't have any time.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's another.
Yeah.
I felt that it was a very effective option for me who does not have the time, or actually don't really have the interest to actually sit there and completely learn all of this.
So I remember dating. You remember that crap? So like you show up and like this girl, you go talk to her, and it's like weird for a little bit, right? You go on a couple dates and you're like, it's still kind of weird, but you can talk without, and then a couple months go by and then it gets kind of comfortable. So languages are like dating, once you get past the awkward stage, then like he said, you can get past the awkward stage in a book. I mean, that's how I learned how to date. I'm just kidding. Although my wife would probably say that, right? But once you get past the awkward stage, right, and you're dating this language, so to speak, that's the thing. And I dated a lot, right, because I wanted to find the right wife, and I did. And so, date a lot and be uncomfortable. You should commit yourselves today, even just to spend a half hour looking at the other woman. I mean, that sounds bad. I shouldn't have said that like that, quite. But the other language, right? C# will not get mad at you if you go around dating a little bit. You're not married to it. At least I hope you're not, right? Get past the awkward stage. And then, you know, when you go back to C#, your first love, right? You'll be a better dater. This is breaking down quickly.
Maybe next question.
I want to save you, we don't want a lot of promiscuous programmers out here.
Right. Oh, we do, but not that way.
Yeah. Go ahead. You got something, James, or
No,
are you ready to go?
I think Seth is afraid of the mic, so.
I was just curious, as programmers, we have to learn so much, and we also spend a lot of time at work. I wondered if you guys had any advice on being a programmer and learning, but also being a parent and programming not taking all of that time.
Yeah. So, I feel like we need to hold hands in a circle. I have a 4-year-old, and some of my coworkers, some of the people I worked with at the time I had this kid were in the room, and the reputation I had was, yeah, he codes all the time. And then we had the baby, and then it was, sometimes he codes at work even. So it's tough, and one of the things I wanted to follow on to a point you were making is have a lot of patience with yourself. We work in an industry where we tend to be a little bit too hard on one another. You forget what that learning experience was. It's easy to forget, especially when you focus on one technology. You have probably forgotten how many mistakes, how many times you tripped and fell on your face, because now it's natural to you. And you know, if you see somebody struggling, you're just kind of like, noob. You know, it's so easy. I don't understand why they don't like it. Well, you do that to yourself as well. The first time you sort of branch out into another language, you're frustrated because you managed Hello World and maybe it built and ran, right? You have to be really patient with yourself, because no matter what it is, you're not going to get it in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So, you know, learning a little bit and just trying to get some of it and then come back to it again, come back to it again, and come back to it again, and give yourself permission and time to take a while, because, I mean, I honestly believe that for most folks, that is the experience. You just forget about it, right? Because you get comfortable and confident with it.
I mean, everybody's going to be on their own time frame, and you mentioned kids, but there's all sorts of outside things that are going to influence how quickly you learn, how much time you have to dedicate to something. You just have to be okay with what your cycle is. It might be longer, it might be shorter. It doesn't mean it's worse, it doesn't mean it's slower, or you're not picking it up the way you should. It's just different for everybody. You just have to be okay with that.
I have 4 kids. So having kids is like carrying a bucket of water, and each kid is a hole in the bucket, right? And so, and you know, like when you have 2 kids, you know, you could go man-to-man defense, and then when you have 3, you go zone, and then 4, it's like, oh, crap. What I found, and this is important, is what we love to do, we should show our kids that we love to do it. I taught my kid how to program Xbox games using Kodu. Right? I get the gadgeteer thing and start making a robot. My daughter and I, we're gonna make a robot. She's 8. She's smart enough to do that. Every 8-year-old is smart enough to get a gadgeteer. Did you guys go to that thing? And the thing about it is, and when we're talking about polyglot programming, right, is when you are forced, like the reason why I make open source libraries and I give talks is not necessarily because I want you to learn it. It's because I want to learn it, right? And so when I'm teaching my girl the idioms of Kodu, or when I start to teach her Python, or when I start to teach her whatever, that forces me to formalize in my head how I'm going to tell a child, right? And now it's like, honey, we're not playing games, we're making them. Come on, babe. And then you sit down with your 8-year-old, right? You sit down and do it. There is no reason why we can't do this with our kids. In fact, us as technologists, I think we're crippling our kids, because it's like, I know Spanish, and I haven't taught Spanish to my kids, and my wife every day is like, you should talk to us. And I'm like, I know, you know, you can bring your kids into this world, have them think this way, And the faster they think this way, the quicker they'll be successful, right? Because then you can start building hours on them, and they're like, well. Wait, no, that's not what
Well, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and a couple of things that I guess I've experienced is one is, if you can, even fight for it at work a little bit. Fight to be able to work on some of these a little bit at work, and maybe it's not practical, but for me, I can't really learn things until I really have a problem to solve, and I don't always have problems at home to solve programmatically, but I do have problems at work that need to be solved. So, that's one, and then the other, like Alex said, just taking those baby steps. I mean, for me, it's more like working on open source stuff, but I can't say like, well, tonight I'm going to get this done, because tonight I may have to lay with my 2-year-old for 2 hours, and then I'll fall asleep with her and wake up at 11:30. And that's fine. You just can't. It's just those baby steps. You can't say tonight I'm going to get this done, because as a parent, you just never know.
All right. Last question, and we'll wrap it all up.
Mr. Cal?
Is, I have a question. I don't remember who at one comment this while we were talking. Someone brought up the issue of readability, and this is just somewhat of a personal opinion, recommendation, encouragement, admonition. You pick your favorite category. I don't care. But we all started at some reading level and worked our way up when it comes to just actual normal literature reading, right? And readability is a really subjective space. I really encourage you guys to not get stuck on that. You read, the more of other people's code you read, the better you will become at reading code, and I actually think you're going to have a lot of what John talked about a second ago, those aha moments that he gets from reading books. I've had a ton of those from reading other people's code, and it was really hard at first. We read our own code, it's easy, but find other libraries that you really respect and dive the code, especially in a language you're familiar with, and try to get a mental model of that will challenge you for a while. But the question I have, we talked a lot about being polyglot, and we focus more on how to better our career, maybe from how we think, mental model, and I think all that's super important. What would you guys say to someone that's been, say, a C# or JavaScript developer that wants to actually shift their career? Because a lot of developers face, I've gone through this myself, having had a database background of, wow, I'd really love to do app dev and front end, but I wasn't senior in that space at the time, but I was senior in other stuff, and I had a big fork in the road to decide, do I want to do data warehousing or get into front end app dev? So I had to make the choice of, take the pay cut. What are some things you say to people that would like to shift their actual career track and not just be about enrichment?
So before I became a manager with Telework, like I said, I was a consultant, and I was involved a lot in management, managing teams, helping developers kind of transition, as well as sales, because you have to eventually go out and get somebody to trust you to build their site. And what do clients or bosses always want? Well, what have you done? Show me experience. Show me something that tells me I can believe in you, because I'm going to give you real money to solve this problem for your business. And that's kind of a tough thing to get over, because at the end of the day, we all get it. We all understand we're going to move forward, we're going to learn new things. We all feel confident in this. We all understand our abilities. We all understand, there's a learning curve with this stuff, but we need to get through it. The people, unfortunately, who sometimes are the gatekeepers for us in this don't really think in those terms. They think in terms of, I need a website, I have $500 apparently to build it, and I need it in 10 days. Go. And when you're trying to get another job or get a promotion at work or get a consultant place at a client site, they care very much about experience. So and this is not probably the answer you wanted to hear, but sometimes you just have to be willing to maybe take professional, almost a tiny step back, willing to take a few things that aren't as glamorous to kind of prove your mettle. Doing some stuff on the side definitely helps too. A lot more people are getting open to looking at people's open source contributions. That 5 years ago, that was unheard of. Nobody cared. If you didn't do it, weren't being paid to do it, almost like it didn't exist. But it's opening up there a little bit more. So that would be one thing I would definitely say is, as you're learning these languages, try getting involved in the open source community and be visible. Have contributions. Try to get things committed. Don't just throw stuff up to get it committed, but do things there that people can look at and see, because you have to prove some kind of value to these people, because to them it's not an academic exercise. They're giving you real money for a real business.
I think if you find the right company, like for example, there's a company in Detroit that Monday after lunch you have something called innovation time. right? And if you're a SQL person, during your innovation time, you can say, I want to learn app dev, and they'll let you. If you find the right organization, they will foster that feeling.
That's part of what I was looking to. I mean, not that there's like the right answer, but in my experience, I've had better success with companies that have encouraged me to innovate in multiple areas, and I've shifted my career at a job as opposed to having to start at a new job.
Yeah.
And I was curious to see if that was a similar thing.
Well, Quicken Loans is still hiring. That's who does it. I've been to their office. They're some of the most innovative things have happened because some dev or some person was like, during innovation time, I'm going to try this, right? And you're with Quicken Loans, right, Mr. Freed? And they do that all the time. It's just find the right organization, and if you can't find the right organization, make your own organization. There's talks on how to go independent. You probably saw it here. I personally would not do that because I don't like chasing the pipeline and then chasing the money. But where I work, they give me this ultimate flexibility to say, I want to take my product there, right? And whatever it takes, they don't care. Whatever it takes to get there, I'm going to do it. So if I have to go read a book or go to this thing or do that thing or come talk to you or come get, it usually comes down to the right organization.
Those are few and far between. So you got to really hunt for them. If you can find one, definitely try to get them.
Yeah, for me, I mean, this really happened for me, and I think it really was getting involved in open source, and it wasn't necessarily about getting noticed as far as getting involved, but it was about meeting people and putting yourself out there and getting out of your comfort zone a little bit. I know that for the longest time I didn't have a blog. I mean, there's many people out there that don't either, and the reason was the same as probably everyone would say. I don't have anything to say that anyone would want to read. But you know, you got to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, put yourself out there. Same with putting code out on GitHub. I mean, a lot of people say they want to contribute to open source, and that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, go do a pull request and get it accepted. There's so many ways to contribute to open source. Just answering questions on Stack Overflow is contributing to open source. Helping out your friend with it, you know, going on some forums, helping with documentation. I mean, those are things that are really tough for these open source people that are doing it on the side when their kids fall asleep. So there's so many ways to get involved besides just that pull request. You know, hit up one of the maintainers of some project you like on Twitter and ask them how you could help. I mean, there's just so many ways to do it, and I think that's really what changed my path.
One of the things I've done in the past is be willing to demonstrate capability and value in a different technology stack and the one I was told to deliver in. So that there's a side-by-side apples-to-apples comparison, because what you're saying is right. Sometimes organizations are not going to make the investment in you that you might like them to. There are a lot of companies represented here at DevLink that will do that. You should pay attention to who those companies are. But everybody, I think, has said it in one form or another, don't let your employer be the thing that decides your destiny. That's not going to be in your best interest. Be willing to take some additional initiative and invest some of your personal time in something that you're interested in and show that you can provide value to somebody, because at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do. I mean, I'd still do it on the side, but I wouldn't spend nearly as much time as I do if somebody couldn't pay me to, and they couldn't afford to pay me if I wasn't delivering value. So if you can show someone you can deliver either through open source or through community involvement in some way, make relationships with people, show that you're sharp and you've picked this stuff up and you're eager to learn. Some places are just dying for people who are eager to learn something new, right? They absolutely are. There are a lot of opportunities for folks who show themselves eager and capable, because my experience has been, if you're really interested in whatever it is, you can learn anything.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Thanks everybody. Just so you know, I bullied all of them to get up here. So.